me welcome you to the conversation segment of the Signature Show this Sunday. The elections have come and have gone. A couple of days back, the Inspector General of Police, Ali Baba, reeled out the number of arrests that Nigeria police made of people who tried to undermine the process. And the IG has promised that those people will be prosecuted. But everybody saw in the social media all manner of infractions, all manner of violence, all manner of carrying of ballot boxes. And contestants have complained. And in some of these instances, the police were neck deep, hand deep into some of these untoward actions. It appears that the police is procurable, not just in this election matter, but in several other anti-social developments. Should the police be procurable? Should it be a part of a challenge? Is there anything wrong with that institution? And is there anything we can do for the police? And this afternoon, there's an old friend who got missing, whom I've luckily found, happily found, Dr. Hussein Abdu. Dr. Hussein, where have you been? Yeah. Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Chief. Very good to meet you again. Thank you. Yeah.
Doc, you heard me.
Yes.
What is wrong with Nigeria Police Force?
Thank you. I think this is a very pertinent question, and sometimes it's so difficult to have a grasp of some of those things. We're dealing with a major crisis in the country and in most developing society, which actually have to do with institutional capture. That strategic institutions of the state that are expected to serve the collective can be captured by a few who control the levers of power and therefore use that institutions to achieve whatever they aim to achieve. And I think this is one of those things that happened to the police. But before I get there, I also think that a lot about the police is also historical. The history of the Nigerian police, right from the colonial time, it was never established as people's policing institution. It was established as a repressive institution of the colonial state. And therefore, colonial pacification, repressions were deeply undertaken and used, and the police were the major instrument that were used to actually achieve that. And that has become deeply part of the police training and the orientations. And the understanding that they have been given is actually to protect the state. But they can actually not, historically not been able to differentiate between the state as an institution and the people who are responsible for running the institutions. And therefore, security is defined within that narrow confines of the security of the people who are in charge than the security of the collective. So even in post-independence, we graduated with that history, with that structure, with that system, and with that kind of training. It may surprise you to know that, look, a lot have not changed in terms of the laws, even the Police Act, that it has a history. The history is from the colonial time. The orientation, the training, are still largely around that. We all are very conversant with the whole history of native authority policing and what they have actually happened in many parts of the country. So I think even when we transited to civil rule, during military, we also know what the police suffered as an institution, the loss of priority of the policing institutions, the underfunding, under-equipping, under-training that the policing institutions went through. I think when we transited to civil rule, we also did not invest enough into the civilization of the police, and also ensuring a more democratic control of not just the policing institution, but even of the armed forces. So our institutional capacity to do that wasn't there. Obasanjo was the first president of the elected president in this republic, and there were emphasis, understandably so, his own personal experience under Abacha, his incarceration, prosecutions, and conviction, and his personal feeling about it, and holding the military institution responsible for that. Energy was more invested in reforming the military institution. I'm not sure that reform had actually taken place, but we saw some drastic actions in terms of retiring those who are classified as political and all those things. But I think there wasn't major investment in the police force. There have been about 4 to 5 different police reforms that have been instituted, and all of them have remained inconclusive by different government, about 5 different reforms. But when you look at the details of those reforms, you will find out that they were more around functionality, institutional structure, equipping, than reorientation of the police. So that is not there. And I think the police, I'm happy this is what we're discussing, but it is not different from other institutions of the state that have actually been captured. So the character of the society is what is defining the kind of policing that we're experiencing. And specifically about what you are talking about, or procurement of the police. And practically every institution of the state can actually be procured. Assemblies, states, and others never get legislations passed. Governors have to get certain things done to actually, for some of those legislations to actually pass. And I'm saying this with due respect to very honest friends who are in those assemblies, and I appreciate some of their frustrations, because I have friends at those levels and who are excellent people, but they are very few and they go through certain frustrations. You want to build a house, whether it is in Abuja or it's in your state or anywhere. Once development control people came and put a red ink on you, stop, you actually know that it is not that you have done anything wrong. You probably have everything. The idea is that you have to go and see them and settle for that before you do that. And this is a general context in which people are operating. And therefore, the societal relationship with our institutions have become transactional. You pay, you get a service. You don't pay, you don't get a service done. And many times, it is not the institution itself, but it is the individuals within those institutions, which many times we are also not able to separate. Because for me, police is police. How do I differentiate that? And you see that. You are driving, somebody in a vehicle, you see a policeman inside that vehicle. Somebody has procured it. You can go, there are mechanisms where you can go if you are a very important person, you pay, and you have police following you everywhere. And when the police follows you everywhere, if something happens, the police comes in your defense. And that defense will actually mean harassing the other side, whether you are right or you are wrong. And this is what we have seen. Politicians began to do this. And if we examine this, we also have to examine it in the context of the attitude, the behavior, the values that drives our politicians. Because it takes some of those desperate politicians to procure this police to actually do some of those things that we
Yeah,
just described.
Doc, you mentioned that on 5 occasions,
Yes.
this country has tried police reform.
Yes. Yes, since 1999.
Is nobody really
Yes.
conscious that there needs to be infused into the Niger police a different orientation, a different ideology, a different, not just the equipment, not just recruitment in the number. Let me just draw your attention to something. In this last election, both the Presidential National Assembly and the governorship state assembly elections, there is massive complaint of infractions, violence. But with respect to this conversation, the police were seen on video complaints raised by contestants that the police really participated in undermining the process. Now the Inspector General of Police released out arrests that were made. Does the headship of the police not see that its members being available to be procured to undermine the process is a mental matter, an attitude matter that it should be concerned about? And who will help that police leadership to identify this problem and begin to solve it?
Thank you, Chief. Because I also was involved in this electoral process as an observer, and I led one of the biggest observer groups in the country during that elections. I want to also say that there were instances where the police were right on point. Their intervention was swift. They made some very good arrests, and probably those were what part of the number that he was counting. But at the same time, there were also reports of infractions by men and women of the police force, like in some of the locations that you did mention. But very quickly, the police reform that we talk about, I think it is just that there hasn't been that level of seriousness in terms of what the kind of investment that we need to make the reform. Reform requires a certain level of sacrifices. For me, an institution like the police, I don't see any value in getting retired senior police officers to chair or serve in these reforms. Because what they bring
is
to
what
that process is what they have.
And what they have is what the complaint is.
Is what the complaint is. That's one. Two, a major governing institution of the police is actually the Police Service Commission. But the commission, the law establishing the commission provides that is somebody of a retired level of IG that will actually be there. So what does that person bring? What the person brings is what we have been complaining about. So if you were an IG and you couldn't lead a significant change in the place, then you now grow to become a member or a chair of the service commission, including those who actually left the role in a very embarrassing manner, have actually chaired this commission. So the commission would have been a very important governing body that holds the police force accountable, because it has a certain level of representation, including the representation of civil society. Don't forget the fact, but don't mind the fact that sometimes non-civil society people are actually meant to be there to represent civil society. We've seen that. You see politicians appointed to represent civil society, but we have had instances where really civil society people were there. I think Ayobe was there, Otive was there, Romy Mom was there. But the larger collections of people are people who have nothing, and with due respect to them, to offer in terms of the kind of thing we expect. And that is why many times what you end up finding is a contention between the police management, which is the hierarchy, and the commission fighting over contract and recruitment. All true. What we just hear is quarreling over who recruits into the police force. And because the recruitment process in Nigeria is an opportunity for patronage distribution. You go to your village, you pack people to come and join the force. And then you become a celebrity in your village because you have helped people to join this force. But into all honesty, is that system has been breached and therefore contribute to compounding the kind of crisis that we have. So I think our institutional mechanisms to getting the upper people to see some of those things doesn't work. I have served as a shadow advisor on a small advisory committee that a former IG who had really meant well said that I need a group of independent experts. And then he appointed us on his own. I think there are about 5, 6 of us in that small committee that we meet from time to time to advise him on what he needs to do on major national issues. So that person was committed. He wanted to do the right thing, and he got few people to actually advise him who he knew they are independent and they are knowledgeable about this whole thing. And I knew we did that. And sometimes it's good to sometimes when people do well, you don't bother. I think it's good to mention it's Arase. Arase did that with some of us. And
he's returned as a chair.
Yeah, he returned as a chair. And I hope, I haven't met him yet, but I hope that he will continue with that mentality. And I think we will also reassemble ourselves probably and see what support we can give so that he doesn't get bogged down with the whole contention with the police hierarchy in terms of who recruits. And then the micromanaging, because the service commission is like a board. So the board should not be too involved in the
management of the institution.
Management of that institution. And when they do that, you have the right to respect and you are able to hold the institution to account. But when you don't do that and you are on altercation, even at the level of the media, with an institution you are supposed to hold to account, you undermine yourself. But I hope Arase will be different, because if it's somebody that I know, I think he may be different. But is that enough to change the police? No, for sure. There are a lot that we actually need to do to transform the Nigerian police. And I think it's a conversation that as Nigerians we need to take very seriously.
So let me give you a scenario. The police force is a federal institution.
Yes.
The commissioners of police report to the Inspector General of Police.
Yes.
How come a governor is able to procure the police within his jurisdiction and use them for all manner of?
Yeah, again, what the commissioner of police will get from the governor in a state, he can't get it from the center. He cannot get it from the center. And therefore, when he's dealing with the governor, there's a lot involved. One is that the governor is the chief security officer of the state. And therefore, he actually have to work very closely with the commissioner of police of that state. Understandably so, that's fine. But to get them to do something that is illegal, it takes certain level of fraternity and certain level of resource investment to get that.
You have been economical with the word.
Yes.
No, it is inducement.
Yeah.
Resource investment. Okay. You have been very fine about it.
Yeah, okay. I didn't just want to be very flippant with my words, so I was just trying to be very choosy with the way I select my words. Yes, it is to induce that, for that to happen. And again, look, even the commissioners are conscious of the fact that sometimes they are left between the devil and the deep blue sea. They may not comply. And we have seen examples of those who fail to comply. But in some cases, they get moved from that state and replaced with a playable person. Do you understand? So sometimes a lot of them with certain ethical challenge, we easily cave in. And then those of them who are strong, and we can give an example of one or two, there are not many of them, but we have seen examples of those of them who actually stood their ground on certain things. There is a particular commissioner of police in Kano during the 2019 general election. In Kano, popularly they call him Shingan. And he was excellent man from Gombe and stood his ground on certain issues. Even during these last elections, there are examples of some of them who stood their ground on certain issues. Some got removed and replaced and all that. And we have seen also the rapidity. If we check some states, and I don't know how many people have done that analysis, there are some states that have had about 3 commissioners probably within 2 months in terms of those movement. I think part of our job is to find out where was that kind of rapid changes in the commissioners within a state. So all these things happen, and that is what informed the kind of control that the governors have. But to be honest, the nature of our democracy in Nigeria since 1999 is that it's actually state governors controlled. It's largely state governors controlled. They are very much in charge. The way they exert power, it's not the same as the way even the president of the country does. In fact, what governors do and get away with it, the president cannot try it. Because the national attention is more on the center than it is on the state. And people forget the fact that the state is probably more important to us than actually the center, including the resources available to the state. So we're not paying that attention, and the level of impunity at the state level is deepening, and people are not being held to account. So I think the policing conversation is a major conversation, because it has a very good connections with the quality of our democracy. This morning, as I was driving and dropping my kids in school, and then I heard a civil society group has gone to give an award to the Inspector General of Police, Usman Alibaba. I congratulate him. But my sense is, and they were speaking about how excellent he has been. Of course, I haven't invested in assessing his performance per se, so I'm not in position to pass judgment on that. But I find it a bit curious that a civil society group, I can't remember the name of the group, but they're giving an award. And here, me and you now having a conversation in terms of what the police are doing right.
Now, Doc, I'm looking at now who and what we should be doing for the police. Let me start with who. If the governors can procure and use the police the way they want to do, if I become upwardly mobile and can have some millions of naira to throw around, I can procure some police officers to accompany my wife to the mall. I'll tell you a very interesting story. The wife of my cousin confronted me in the village some 3 years back and said, that's my uncle, each time you come home to the village, you're driving and there are no policemen accompanying you. I've known you all these years. But look at this boy of yesterday who's gone to Lagos. He's bought a big car. Each time he comes home, there are 3 armed policemen at his gate. Have you not arrived at that status that policemen should be seeing you home? In other words, and Nigeria police, even in the eyes of the illiterate woman in the village, police have been reduced to a status symbol.
Unfortunately, that is what it is. If you are an artist, a musician, a Nollywood or whatever, you can hire the police, and then they follow you everywhere, including follow you to commit crime. If you're a politician, you can hire, and then they follow you. And the number of policemen we actually have in the country is so low to police even the country. Probably less than about 350,000 men and women of the forces. And the kind of crisis we're dealing with in different parts of the country is enormous, that number is not even enough. But we see people that we invested public resources to train, serving individuals, including aiding and abetting the crime that some of them commit. And for me, that's the unfortunate part of it. So to have a police on your escort or sitting in front, side with your driver, is a sort of symbol. It tells you how important you are. And we see that many times. Look, some of the smuggling that takes place in our borders are done with customs officers seated in front of the vehicle. The smugglers procure them. So it's a crisis we are dealing with, a crisis of our institution. Yes, this conversation is more on the police. But if you check any institution in our country, you will find this kind of thing.
You know, I was trying to say who and what. And that was why I was giving the example.
Yes.
The National Assembly has committees overseeing the police.
Yes.
The executive, the president, is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, including the police.
Yes.
This is the topmost echelon of supervisory authority over the police in Nigeria. What should they be doing for the police force? Remember, we have talked about orientation. Yeah. Because to me, police requires dismantling. Yeah. Can we afford it? Can they see it? What ought they be doing now?
Yeah. You know, there's a lot that we need to do. There are some structural issues, and there are some that have to do with a larger reform that will come with a better legislation. And I have, because I've been involved with this conversation with the police. And to be very honest, probably in the last 15 years, been part of major discussions on police reform. I know that I have met some excellent police officers. And I know some of them who even retired that are consulting for other countries. Yes. Ironically, excellent people, you know, who have served in the police, some up to Assistant Inspector General of Police, some as police commissioner because of their education, their exposure. We work with some of them, supporting other countries and in their reform process. Unfortunately, when we are reforming here, we don't involve those kind of people. So we need a proper reform of the police, but a reform that is not police-led, a reform that will probably citizen-led, where you actually get very knowledgeable people. Look, we have excellent, even academics, who have done extensive work on policing, depth of knowledge in the reforms. I've done an extensive study of the reform of the police post-apartheid in South Africa. It's unbelievable what went through. We've seen what happened in Liberia post-war. In Liberia, it's not perfect there, but I'm just giving instances where major incidents happen and how countries come up to reform. I think that's what we need for the new leadership of the country, is to come in and have in mind that we have to reform this institution. But we have to reform it independently. Number two is that any reform that we undertake that does not permeate down to our recruitment and training, we haven't started. So we have to get to ensure that we recruit, and then our training institutions are not dehumanizing in a manner that it brings out wrong people, because that's what you'll find. Go to our police training institutions, particularly where other ranks are recruited, are trained, either in Kaduna or Lagos. Go and check the facilities available in those places. It does not bring, that kind of institution cannot bring out the right caliber of people that we want in the police, in the police force. The second thing is actually the accountable, the institutions. Look, the National Assembly committee on policing, we also need to be very clear around that and the quality of people that are in those things. I actually think that the whole concept of Minister of Police Affairs needs to also be checked again. Is this something that fits when you actually have the Inspector General of Police who is leading on this? Because it's a different thing when you have tripartite institutions, and then you have a minister who is lead. But even with that, you actually have a chief of defense staff who has that kind of umbrella, this thing around them. I don't really think that you need a minister at that level, and that you can, so that the president can actually have direct relationship and there is no intermediation with those functionaries. Because sometimes the intermediations allowed, it water down some of the issues and the day-to-day conversation that is required between the what would you call it, the leadership of the and the political leadership. I think that's probably will need to be checked. I would rather go for an advisor on policing to the president, which is very different from national security advisor. It's policing, so which is basically that civil institutions and getting direct advice on how best to manage those. But let me allow you to ask a question.
I just was going to add to what you were saying.
Yes.
Do you think that the president should be appointing his prepared office?
No, I think that the president does not, even at the moment,
The Council of State
doesn't appoint. The Council of State doesn't appoint. It's an approving officer because the Police Service Commission does the recommendation. In principle, that's what we are supposed to see, and the president approves that recommendation before it gets to the National Assembly. So there are mechanisms. It's not an outright thing. I think part of the challenge we had in the previous time was around security of tenure, and why the police, Inspector General of Police, are not independent enough is also because they don't have a security of tenure. But I think we've done well in terms of strengthening that security of tenure, and now it's even being abused, where somebody is due for retirement, and then you say that he has to stay for a particular number of time. And I think this is totally unacceptable because it kills morale. Everybody who have served the police force and have gotten to a level of an assistant inspector general of police is looking forward to one day becoming an IG. And so, of course, not all of them would be. When you delay them, and it affects their morale. So I think it's what we need to deal with. There can be a process. There is no way you can. I would probably not like to be in a country where the head of the country is not involved in the appointment of the major security position around it. But there can be accountabilities around that system. It's a practice. We cannot vote for an IG. We can't throw it out and say let's vote for an IG. So the president will still have to be involved because ultimately the person still reports to the president. And the basic principle in recruitment and discharge is that you recruit your direct report. It's a basic HR principle. You have to be part of the recruitment of your direct report, because your direct report needs to fit in certain, your ideas, your vision. Do you understand? Yeah, I can understand sometimes our grievances when it's not getting right. At all time, we're not getting it right. And then we say, maybe there should be other ways of doing it. But because this person will have to work with the president and the commander-in-chief, the commander-in-chief will have to be involved in that process. But some people or a particular body like the National Assembly will ultimately actually have to approve. What I don't like is appointing them on acting capacity for months before. We should actually have a proper succession planning system. And that's what happened in many societies. You already know when you have an IG or you have a chief of defense staff, you know
Beyond him,
there are 3, 4 people, and it will be one of them. It shouldn't be 20 people. It should not be 10 people. But there are 2, 3, 4, 5 people that you know that amongst them,
one of them fits the bill.
One of them fits the bill. So you don't actually have any problem because you have a proper succession plan. Every institution that will be needs to be functional, that operates well, operate with a clear succession plan. You must have it. So through that succession planning process, you know that some people are being trained and groomed to actually fit in. So that when this one falls by the side, you know where to get the next person. You know where to get the next person from.
Somebody says to me,
yes,
this attitude thing you talk about,
yes,
that there's one stroke that can glide.
yes,
Change the name of Nigeria Police to, instead of the Nigeria Police Force, to the Nigeria People's Police. Does it make sense?
No, it doesn't make sense. I don't like the name force.
Remove force and change to Nigeria People's Police.
Yeah, I know that the Obasanjo did change, but the challenge was that it didn't change. It didn't change it in the constitution, and those who are against it, because there was this Nigerian Police Service came at a point, if I'm not forgotten, and I also knew that when Tafa Balogun was in IG, he brought up a slogan or a motto for the police to serve with integrity. You remember all those things. Names matter, but not every time. Particularly when you are dealing with institutional rot. When you have this level of rot, even if you change it to whatever, you are not going to change the personnel, and it will not change the culture and the practice that you actually have in that institution. I think, yes, I would love to see that the force is removed. Not because I believe that will change everything, but because I believe that you can use that removal to re-educate people, to recognize more what the role of the police actually is. But the police has been a repressive institution, unfortunately, and historically, and that's what we need to transform. Changing the name alone will not change everything. I actually think you need to take some more drastic action in terms of personnel. I actually think that you need to bring civilians into the police. You need to get more civilians to go into the training institutions. That the training of the police, the teaching, the classroom work in the police institution is actually done by civilians, and the physical drill is done by the police. So when you do that, you change the mentality. You change the mentality that it's not the police training the police. That people who are even non-uniform police are actually the ones doing the teaching. And therefore, you are able to take more people's perspective into those conversations. I think there is need for investment and partnership with human rights organizations and human rights bodies like National Human Rights Commission to actually run trainings on human rights right from the training institutions. And I'm saying this because not because I think military was better, but I was, I was on academics in Nigerian Military University, Nigerian Defense Academy, and sometimes you see how some of these kind of things plays out. So you have civilians there. I actually think that apart from having the ministry of police, I actually think that in certain policing bodies and institutions and offices, you should also have people who are non-uniformed, who are also helping to train the police and also serving the police institutions as civilians. It's part of the way of showing that the police is a civil institution. I actually think sometimes the craziness of my idea, and I apologize to my police friends who are watching this, who I know will vehemently disagree with me. I actually think that even to lead the police as an IG of the police, that you can actually appoint a civilian. And I've seen that, and I can give several examples of many countries, if they challenge me off camera. where you can actually appoint a civilian during reform. You have things to change, because that up there is a political appointment. It's not that much a service appointment. It's to some extent service, because you have to go through the hierarchy for you to go there. That's what is service. But to get there is still a political appointment. And therefore, you can get a civilian to actually lead that and to be able to lead the reform. Because you see, why reforms are difficult in uniform institutions is because people relate with that one in a regimented manner. That's the problem. And then the second one, it is a turn by turn thing. That this is my turn. And why is it that you didn't do these changes where the other person was there?
It is now I'm there that you want to do it.
Then you now want to change it. So it is this my turn by turn thing that doesn't. Then it's very hierarchical.
So you need an outside person to do it.
You need an outside person. You need an outside person to do it. And when you are doing, you do it in form of a national emergency. You need an outside person to do it, and I know I'm going to be in trouble. My friends here, but they also know my position on these matters. That I believe, and I have shared several examples of where reforms in the police institution, including in South Africa, was led by civilians, are actually appointed into those roles, and you are able to drive major changes without those encumbrances of hierarchy. And you begin to define hierarchy. You are still going to work with some critical police officers at that hierarchy. You are still going to work with some civilians that you are actually going to bring into the system. But it sends a significant messaging in terms of what it is. Look, I have police friends who actually don't believe that there is a civil institution.
Because it is police.
Because it's force. Yeah, I remember in those days, even where during military rule, where police don't mind being categorized among the armed forces. So that's the kind of thing. It's a kind of orientation, because that force gives them a certain level of
confidence, control, power
that we are actually we
don't need.
Yes, and then the other one is that, how do we use our reform to deal with some of those frivolities that we have in terms of the policing bodies, like civil defense? Why do we need it? Why can't it be part of the police force? Like Federal Road Safety Corps, why do we need it? These are waste of public resources, not because the people are not performing their responsibility, but because roles are being duplicated. And therefore, what we need is to merge them. They can become departments within the police institutions, but you have one leadership. So you have civil defense, doing what? So you can say, okay, this is the non-armed group or whatever, because each time we create those bodies, we arm them. Now, civil defense have arms. Just very recently, the Drug Law Enforcement Agency received approval to also carry arms. I will not be surprised very soon. Road safety, we also so they also begin to carry arms. So you have, and these are policing institutions. They are all policing bodies. So you are duplicating them. Why can't you just have the road safety as a road traffic unit
under the police force?
Under the police force.
But of the police force.
Of the police force. Why do you have yellow fever?
Of a traffic department of the police force.
So why don't you just have one? It's a department, and that department will be led by an assistant or a deputy inspector general of police. And then you have the civil defense, and you say that, look, these ones are the non-armed side of the police. They don't take arms. And then you gave one DIG to also lead that. But under one, the drug law enforcement agencies, you also have that.
The Narcotics Department of the police force.
Yes, because they were all emerged from the police. So these duplications have contributed to undermining the policing culture and also the resources available. Look, at the point, I don't know whether this has changed now. I've not paid attention to it in the last few years, 2-3 years. But at the point, civil defense people were earning more than the police. A constable in the civil defense earns more than a constable in the police force at a particular time. And at a point, the rate at which the civil defense get more resources is more than what the police get. Because in the National Assembly, the civil defense has become a body that gives jobs to National Assembly members. So if you need your people in your village are disturbing you for job, you just go to civil defense. And civil defense will open the door and they'll give them jobs. And so the National Assembly even attempts, because I will also be involved in that process in the past, to get this merger done, is the National Assembly member that carried it. Because the ease at which they will get young people recruited into the civil defense is not the same thing as the way they will get into the police. So they don't want it. They want the civil defense to remain. And then all they do in the civil defense is to keep giving them the jobs. And it's a badly managed institution. No medical insurance, trouble. But the truth is that they don't even poorly manage. They don't have any insurance scheme. No health insurance, no medical insurance, or no death insurance, no nothing. All they just do is to pay them at the end of the year. The system is poor because it has no institutional history. The history is a voluntary body. And that voluntary body, somebody heading that voluntary body, like a Boy Scout, somebody heading the voluntary body had access to the president. And then used his relationship with the president
and institutionalize it.
This is the crisis we're dealing with. It is the same thing that happened very recently where another body, one group like that, also wear uniforms who have also lobbied.
Peace Corps.
Peace Corps. Peace Corps also wanted to also be institutionalized. The bill went to the National Assembly. It went through readings. I think it got passed, and it was a presidential assent that was declined. So if this person have good relationship with the president, it could easily have gotten passed. So tomorrow Hussein will establish his own security company. And then you go to the president and then you get passed. So this is so the policing, I'm not just saying the police force, policing generally is in crisis. It's in crisis, and this kind of duplications and all that is part of the crisis that policing is going through. And I think any major reform will have to bring all these institutions together.
The present federal police,
yes,
is it enough to serve and service the needs of the nation?
No, I don't think it's enough.
Now, the president and those at the federal level,
yes,
have raised concerns from history,
yes,
that lower level police structure belonging to the states, reaching the local governments, have always constituted a political menace.
Valid point.
Have we grown past that, and therefore do we need lower level policing?
No, we need lower level policing. We have not grown past that, but I think that we can put up an institutional mechanisms that will probably help to manage. I think as a country, we need to recognize that in policy making, we will make mistakes. And then we need to learn from those mistakes and correct them. But we cannot be a country that is afraid of its shadows. I think part of the crisis we are going through, that we've not been able to deepen anything in our democratic process, is that we are so afraid of our shadows. Fear. This will happen if this happens. This will happen if this happens. And they are valid fears. Somebody will ask you, look, why are the state electoral commissions not performing? For me, if you leave me, I will strengthen the state electoral commissions and allow the state electoral commissions to conduct every election at the state level. The National Electoral Commission will only...
Presidency and National Assembly.
Yes, even the presidential elections will be conducted, managed by the state,
and then
collated by the central. But you say that, I raised that recently, and somebody said, my goodness, that's crazy. These are people who will not even allow local government elections to hold. But it's because we didn't pay attention to it. I always give example of Judicial Service Commission. So when you have lower level policing, you have to broaden and change the responsibility of the Police Service Commission. And that actually means that the policing, even though the lower level police structure are managed by the state government, but recruitment and appointment will still be managed by the Police Service Commission. And that helps to manage some of the control issues. We've seen sometimes the Judicial Service Commission go into running battles with the state, but the Service Commission still finds its way. You know, the Service Commission could, maybe a Chief Justice of a state is wrongly appointed, and the Service Commission stood its ground and said no. So judges are appointed by the Judicial Service Commission, even though it's a state service. So I think that that mechanisms will actually help to manage some of this situation. But I believe that with the kind of crisis we are dealing with as a country, and also the need to deepen our federal system, we just have to do this. So that even when the governor is controlling the police, he's controlling his own, not our own. And then we can use our own to counterbalance his own, because we can even arrest his own and detain and prosecute his own. So I really think that if we think deeper and we put up the right structures, we may be able to do that. And I think any reform that we are going to have in future must take this in mind. And I don't think this time around it will be as contentious as it was in the past.
Dr. Abdu, do you think that this is a conversation? Pardon my language.
Yes.
I do not know that it's right.
Yes.
Is it a conversation of no reproductive consequence?
Yes.
Because the political leadership at the National Assembly, within the presidency, among the governors, do you think they have the depth of thought to appreciate what we have said this afternoon, and therefore to begin to harvest points that can help in realigning the whole thing? Or are we just pouring water on stone?
I think they have the depth of thought and strength to understand what we are talking about. I think they believe, I think some of them are actually concerned about the state of the nation. I think there are some of them who actually wants to get this country right, on track. But I also believe that there are vested interests. And vested interests are not necessarily the people that are in charge. They may not actually be in this institution. They may not, but they are interested parties. And they have significant capacity to sway things. And so the challenge have always been about the challenge of vested interest and making things or reforms and changes difficult. Because if you are a beneficiary of a rot, you don't
let go.
You don't let go. That's the political economy of it. You don't let go because you are a beneficiary of it. And in a society where it's a zero-sum game, your gain is my loss. So you don't just want to let go. And that's whether there are policing contractors you are talking about, whether there are people within the policing force who actually think next, whether there are politicians who are benefiting. So there are a lot of things, vested interest. So it is not simply around the people in the National Assembly or the person who is the president. So the challenge will be, can we get the people in the National Assembly to stand, to stand more against this vested interest? Can we get the president to look beyond the interest of this category of people and do the right thing? But the right things, people also should now recognize, is that right things don't necessarily give you immediate benefit. Sometimes part of the crisis of reform in our country
is impatience with the gestation period.
Yes, we don't, because when you are reforming, you are changing things, it creates an image of crisis. It comes with that kind of image of crisis. And therefore, we need to be patient to get that gestation period through before we begin to reap the fruit of that reform. But people are not that patient. And part of the reason also is that we don't communicate well. When you are making a big change, You should invest in communication, preparing people's minds. Don't bring the change immediately. Take your time. It could take you 1 year educating people. You have made up your mind what you intend to do. But it could take you 1 year investing in people, preparing them. Our politicians are too in a hurry because they don't think long term. They think next election. So they don't even have time to prepare people because they are thinking about the next. Oh, Hussein, I spent 1 year doing this when election is coming. So they don't want to do that. But this is, if you want to do a reform, you must engage stakeholder. Change management requires active participation of stakeholders. And that's what we don't do.
Hussein, thank you very much for
Thank you, Chief. Very nice to have you around and good to have this conversation.
Well, this conversation never ends because the issues never end. I want to thank you for investing your time this afternoon with us. Can we meet next Sunday? Good afternoon.